When detectives finally knocked on the right door after 30 years, 4 police chiefs, 3 generations of investigators, and more than 1,000 suspects, the man inside answered their first question with just 2 words. They asked him if he knew why they were there. He said, April Tinsley. He had never been a suspect. Not once in 30 years. His name appeared nowhere in the case file. He had no record of violence. He lived alone in a faded yellow trailer in Grable, Indiana, a quiet Amish country town northeast of Fort Wayne, the kind of place where people leave produce stands unattended with a cash box on the honor system. Neighbors knew him as the odd man at the end of the lane. He kept to himself. He worked decades of night shifts. He waved sometimes. For 30 years, the people of Fort Wayne imagined the man who took April Tinsley as a shadow with claws, a drifter, a monster passing through. The truth was so much smaller and so much worse. He never left. He shopped in their stores. He drove past the church where her funeral was held. He was 20 minutes away the entire time, and the thing that finally destroyed him was not a witness or a confession. It was his own garbage. I have read a lot of case files, and I will tell you honestly, this one stays with you because of what he did in those 30 years of freedom. He did not stay silent. He wrote letters. He left them where children would find them. To understand those letters, you have to go back to a rainy Friday afternoon in the spring of 1988. April Marie Tinsley was 8 years old, with brown bangs and a gap-toothed smile that her mother said could negotiate anything. She lived with her family near Hoagland Avenue in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She liked drawing. She liked her friends. On the afternoon of Friday, April 1, 1988, Good Friday, she was doing the most ordinary thing a child can do, walking back from a friend's house a few blocks away, where she had gone to pick up an umbrella she had left behind. It was raining. She never made it home. Somewhere in those few blocks, in daylight, on streets she knew, a man took her. A witness would later recall seeing a girl matching April's description being pulled into a vehicle, screaming. By Friday evening, her mother, Janet, had called police. Fort Wayne officers swept the neighborhood through the night while the rain kept falling, washing away whatever the streets could have said. The community came out in numbers Fort Wayne had never seen. Hundreds of volunteers searched lots and creek beds and culverts through the Easter weekend. Church congregations that Sunday paused services to pray for a girl most of them had never met. On Monday afternoon, April 4, a jogger moving along a rural road near Spencerville, in neighboring DeKalb County, about 20 miles northeast of April's neighborhood, saw something in the roadside ditch. It was April. She had been raped and asphyxiated. Investigators believe she had likely died the day she was taken, and that her body had been placed in that ditch later, sometime over the weekend, by someone comfortable driving those quiet country roads. One of her shoes was missing. That small detail, a missing child's shoe, will return in this story in the cruelest way you can imagine. The murder of a child reorganizes a city. Fort Wayne parents who had let kids roam free began driving them everywhere. Elementary schools brought in officers to talk about strangers. For a generation of Fort Wayne kids, April's name became the reason for every new rule, every earlier curfew, every parent waiting at the bus stop who had never waited before. The police department flooded the case with detectives, and the early work was enormous. Officers traced April's route minute by minute and interviewed every household along it. They checked registered offenders across 3 counties. They processed the ditch site in DeKalb County and the abduction zone in Allen County, 2 jurisdictions forced into harness on day 1. Evidence from the scene, including biological evidence from April's clothing, was carefully preserved by examiners who treated it, colleagues later said, like something sacred. In 1988, DNA identification was in its infancy, a technology that had never yet solved an American case of this kind. The samples went into storage, a message in a bottle thrown toward a future that did not exist yet. April was buried that April. The line at the funeral home stretched out the door and down the block, most of it strangers. Her classmates released balloons. Her mother went home to a bedroom that would stay exactly as it was for years, because changing it felt like agreeing she was gone. Detectives ran down every lead the old way: known offenders, door-to-door canvasses, vehicle descriptions, polygraphs. Over the years, the suspect list grew past 1,000 names. The right name was never on it. Stop and sit with that for a second, because it is the engine of this whole story. 1,000 names. Every one of them interviewed, checked, alibied, swabbed when the science allowed it. Somewhere in Fort Wayne, men spent years under informal suspicion, neighbors whispering, marriages strained, because they had the wrong truck or the wrong face or the wrong past. That is the other cost of an unsolved child murder, the one nobody puts on a memorial. A city full of wrong answers, and the right one mowing his lawn 20 minutes away, never once asked a single question. Cases like this usually fade in a specific, painful pattern. 2 weeks of front pages, a month of follow-ups, a year of anniversary stories, then silence except in the houses where the absence lives. Fort Wayne refused to follow the pattern, in large part because of April's mother. Janet Tinsley became a fixture of local life, organizing vigils, giving interviews on every anniversary, putting April's face on flyers and billboards year after year. She did this while working, while raising her other children, while answering the same reporter questions every April for 3 decades. People who organize grief into work like that are doing something harder than it looks. They are keeping a case politically impossible to shelve. A memorial bench appeared, a garden. The case was taught to new detectives as unfinished business of the entire department, and more than one Fort Wayne officer over the years kept a photo of April taped inside a locker or a case binder, a private appointment with a promise. And the man who killed April watched all of it. We know he watched because in May of 1990, 2 years after the murder, a child's scrawl appeared on a barn door near the area where April's body had been found. Written in what investigators described as pencil or crayon, in shaky misspelled lettering it read, "I kill 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. I will kill Agan." He misspelled her last name. He misspelled the word again. For a while, police could not even be certain it was real and not some teenager's sick prank. But the location was right, tucked into the killer's geography, and something about the handwriting, childish from a grown hand, felt wrong in a way pranks do not. The barn door was photographed, documented, and filed. Then years of silence followed, and the question hung over the case file. Was that him talking to us? There is a detail from those years that investigators only weighed properly much later. The barn stood in the killer's comfort zone, which meant he had gone back. He had driven out to the place where he left an 8-year-old in a ditch, and he had stood there long enough to write. Geographic profilers will tell you that returning is rare and meaningful. It marks an offender who feels ownership of what he did, who curates it. Police quietly watched the area for a time afterward. He did not return while they were watching. Patience, it would turn out, was the one skill he had in surplus. 14 years later, he answered the question himself, and what he did in 2004 remains one of the most disturbing acts in the history of American cold cases. In the spring and summer of 2004, in neighborhoods around Fort Wayne, young girls began finding plastic bags left on their bicycles. One was found near a mailbox. There were 4 in all. Inside each bag was a handwritten note. The notes claimed explicitly to be from the man who took April Tinsley. One of them read, in its original broken spelling, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and raped and killed April Tinsley. You are my next victim." He addressed them to little girls. He left them where little girls played. The response was immediate and enormous. Fort Wayne police and the FBI canvassed the drop locations, plotted them on maps, and staked out parks and cul-de-sacs through the summer, hoping he would leave a 5th bag into a camera's view. He never did. Handwriting examiners compared the notes to the 1990 barn door and found the same strange, deliberately childish lettering. Behavioral analysts noted that the locations formed a loose ring around the city, the pattern of a man who drove for a living or drove for pleasure, comfortable on back roads, patient as weather. Tip lines lit up. Hundreds of men were looked at. The bags themselves, fingerprinted and swabbed inch by inch, gave up nothing but his DNA, which was both everything and, in 2004, nothing. And the bags did not contain only words. Some held Polaroid photographs of the lower half of a man's body. Some held used condoms. Investigators understood immediately what the condoms might mean, and laboratory testing confirmed it. The DNA inside matched the biological evidence preserved from April's body in 1988. This was not a copycat or a prankster. The killer of April Tinsley was alive, local, watching children, and taunting the police with the one substance on Earth guaranteed to identify him, daring a technology that did not yet have a name for him to come and find him. Think about the arrogance of that. He handed them his entire genetic code, 4 times over, sealed in plastic, because he knew something true and terrible DNA can only convict a man who is already on a list. In 2004, his DNA profile sat in the national database matching nothing because he had never been arrested for anything that required a sample. He was invisible, and he knew he was invisible, and he wanted the police to feel it. The FBI built a behavioral profile: a white male, likely middle-aged by now, socially isolated, sexually fixated, living within a comfortable radius of Fort Wayne, almost certainly following the case in the news. The profile was, as it turned out, nearly perfect. Described thousands of men. Profiles find shapes, they do not find names. The notes went into evidence, the DNA waited. April's mother kept holding vigils, and the man in the yellow trailer went on with his small, quiet life, year after year, believing the silence belonged to him. He had not counted on strangers spitting into tubes. Before we get to how it ended, stay a moment in the years in between, because this is the part of cold cases nobody films. Detectives retired and handed the file to younger detectives, who grew gray with it and handed it on again. Every few years, a new forensic technique would emerge, and the lab would carefully retest what could be spared. When the FBI's CODIS database went national in the late 1990s, the Tinsley profile was among those uploaded, and investigators waited for the automated hit that never came, year after year, because hits require the other half of the match to get arrested, and this man never did. Familial searching of offender databases came and went without a hit, because the killer's relatives, like the killer, had stayed off the lists. Tips arrived in waves whenever local news reran the story, or when America's Most Wanted featured the case in the notes. Each tip had to be run down, each one cost days, none of them was him. In 2009, for the 21st anniversary, investigators took the unusual step of releasing images of the 2004 notes to the public, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting of a brother, a coworker, a tenant. Thousands of calls came in. The right call never did, because the truth about men like this one is that nobody knows their handwriting. Nobody knows them at all. Janet Tinsley once told reporters that the not knowing was a daily weight, that every man of a certain age in a grocery store aisle carried a question mark. That sentence describes thousands of families in this country. In 1988, America had more than 200,000 unsolved homicides on its books, a number that grows every year. Behind each one is a kitchen where someone is still waiting. Then, in April of 2018, a retired investigator's idea out in California changed the arithmetic of waiting forever. Police in Sacramento announced they had caught the Golden State Killer using something called genetic genealogy. Crime scene DNA, uploaded to a public ancestry database, traced through the family trees of distant cousins until the branches narrowed to one man. In Fort Wayne, detectives heard that news the way a locksmith hears about a new key. They had the most valuable thing a cold case can possess: abundant, pristine, willingly donated DNA. The killer had mailed them the key to his own cell in 2004. For 14 years, no lock had existed for it to open. Now there was a lock. The decision in Fort Wayne took no soul searching at all. Some departments hesitated over the new method that sprang, worried about privacy lawsuits, about courts, about being second-guessed. The detectives holding the Tinsley file had a victim who had been 8 years old and a suspect who had promised in writing to kill again. Whatever the new tool's growing pains were going to be, they would be argued about later by lawyers in warm rooms. The file went out the door to the lab that summer with 3 decades of wait behind it. Within weeks of the Golden State Killer arrest, Fort Wayne investigators sent the Tinsley evidence to Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia company that had just opened a genetic genealogy unit led by CeCe Moore, a self-taught genealogist who had spent years reuniting adoptees with their birth families. She would now apply the same method in reverse. Instead of finding a family for a person, she would find a person hiding inside a family. The killer's DNA profile went into the public database GEDmatch, the same one used in California. The matches that surfaced were modest, distant cousins, but they were enough to anchor trees. Moore and her team worked the branches backward to common ancestors and forward again through Indiana farm country, church registries, obituaries, and marriage records. It helps to understand what this work actually looks like, because television compresses it into a montage and it deserves better. A genetic match to a third cousin means you share one set of great-great-grandparents, a couple who may have married in the 1880s. From that couple, every child, every marriage, every descendant has to be charted forward, and most of the chart is built from the public paper trail of ordinary lives: census pages, baptism records, county marriage indexes, newspaper obituaries that list surviving relatives. The genealogist is looking for the place where two different matches trees intersect, because the suspect must descend from both. Every intersection eliminates thousands of people. It is archaeology performed on the living. The tree narrowed with stunning speed. Where the Golden State case had taken months of tree building, the Tinsley tree collapsed in days. CeCe Moore later described cases like this one as the reason she changed careers. The moment the hobby of family history became a tool that could pull predators out of the ground. By mid-2018, the method had cornered a single household's worth of possibility. Two brothers, living in the Fort Wayne area. Age and geography fit both. Only biology could split them. One of them was a man named John D. Miller, born 1959, residing alone in a trailer in Grabble. Two brothers, one answer. And a rule the genealogy team never broke: the tree narrows but only collected DNA accuses. No arrest would happen on a chart. Detectives needed a sample from the man himself, gathered lawfully, without alerting him. So in July 2018, officers began watching the yellow trailer, and they did the least glamorous thing in modern policing. They waited for trash day. On a July morning, investigators collected the garbage bags John Miller had set out at the curb. Under Indiana law, as in most states, trash placed out for collection is abandoned property. No warrant needed. They drove the bags to the lab and sifted them piece by piece. Inside, they found used condoms. You already understand the symmetry, and I promise you the detectives did too. In 2004, this man had used condoms as instruments of terror, sealing his own DNA into bags and leaving them for children, certain the science could never climb from a profile to a name. In 2018, condoms from his own trash can gave the laboratory a perfect one-to-one comparison. The DNA from the Grabble trash matched the DNA from the 2004 bags. It matched the DNA preserved from April's body in 1988. 30 years of mystery resolved into a single sentence on a lab report. On Sunday, July 15, 2018, detectives knocked on the trailer door. John Miller answered. They asked if he knew why they were there. April Tinsley, he said. According to the probable cause affidavit filed in Allen County, Miller then confessed in detail. He told detectives he had abducted April off the street that Good Friday, taken her to his trailer, assaulted and strangled her, and left her body in the DeKalb County ditch. He admitted to the 2004 notes. After 30 years of barn doors and baggies and taunts, in the actual moment there was no defiance left in him at all. 2 words at the door, and the rest came out like water from a cracked jar. He was 59 years old. He had spent more than half his life getting away with it. Detectives who were in the room described the confession as one of the strangest hours of their careers. No lawyering, no bargaining, almost no emotion. Investigators have a phrase for what was happening: the broken dam. Men who carry a secret that large for that long sometimes hold out for years under suspicion. But Miller had never once been suspected, never built the daily armor of denial that suspects rehearse. The knock itself was the verdict. Everything after it was paperwork. Now run the tape of those 30 years again, knowing what Grabble and Fort Wayne learned in a single weekend. The odd, harmless man at the end of the lane was the author of the barn door. The night shift worker who never made trouble had spent the spring of 2004 driving past playgrounds, choosing bicycles. Neighbors interviewed after the arrest groped for memories of menace and mostly could not find any. He was just there, one said. Quiet, you never thought about him twice. In Grabble, the arrest landed like a stone through a window. Television trucks parked along a gravel lane where the loudest regular sound was a buggy horse. People who had sold him gas and groceries for decades stood in their doorways and recalculated 30 years of small talk. One neighbor told reporters she felt sick realizing her own children had ridden bikes past that trailer. Police fielded calls all week from parents across 2 counties asking the same unanswerable question. Was he ever near mine? That is the lesson of this template of crime, and it is genuinely hard to hold. The predator who survives 30 years is not the one who looks like a predator. He is the one who learned to be furniture. Criminologists who studied the case noted that Miller's entire survival strategy was smallness. No close friends to confide in, no partner to notice. No further arrests, as far as records show, no pattern for police to grip. Remove the 2004 notes, and he made one detectable move in 3 decades. Which raises the question the FBI's profilers still chew on. Why send the notes at all? The behavioral answer is uncomfortable. For men like Miller, the crime is never only the crime. It is the power afterward, the secret carried through checkout lines, the city still flinching at his work 16 years later. The notes were a way to touch the fear again. They were also, in the end, the evidence that buried him. The need to be felt as a confession waiting for technology to catch up. There was no trial. In December 2018, John N.D. Miller pleaded guilty in Allen County to murder and child molestation. The plea spared April's family a trial and spared Miller nothing else. The judge sentenced him to 80 years. 40 for the murder, 40 for the molestation, served consecutively. Indiana sentencing math being what it is, the practical meaning was simple. He went into prison on the far side of 60, and he will die inside. At the sentencing, Janet Tinsley faced the man who had owned her imagination for 30 years and discovered what so many families of victims discover in that room. He was small, gray, stooped, mumbling, ordinary. The monster of 3 decades of nightmares turned out to be a man you would pass at a gas station without one flicker of notice. Several family members said afterward that his smallness was its own kind of wound. All those years, lost to that. The courtroom heard no explanation, because there is no explanation that would have meant anything. Miller offered no speech, no apology worth recording, no account of why a 39-year-old man saw a child walking home with an umbrella and decided to end the world. The detectives present, including some who had inherited the case as rookies and were now near retirement themselves, described the hearing as quiet, not triumphant. Cold cases do not end with fireworks. They end with paperwork and a family walking to a parking lot under a weight that has changed shape but not size. April would have been 38 the year he was sentenced. Do the arithmetic of that, because it is the quiet horror underneath every cold case. 38. She would likely have finished school, worked, maybe married, maybe had children of her own who would now be the age she was on that Good Friday. Janet Tinsley has spoken about the strangeness of grieving a child and an adult at the same time. The 8-year-old who was taken, and the woman who never got to exist. The 80-year sentence answered the question of who. It could not touch the question of everything else. In Fort Wayne today, there is a memorial to April Tinsley, and people still leave flowers on the anniversary. The detectives who closed the case made a point at every press conference of saying her name first and his last, an ordering I have kept in this telling, and one worth keeping in every telling. The Tinsley case became one of the first child murders in American history, solved by genetic genealogy, weeks behind the Golden State Killer and ahead of hundreds since. Police departments across the country cite it for a specific reason. It proved the method works even when the offender is a nobody. D'Angelo in California was an ex-cop with a long arrest-adjacent history. Miller was no one, no record, no suspicion. No list had ever held his name, and the science found him anyway, through the bloodlines of cousins who had never heard of him. For the families of the 200,000, that is the meaning of this story. The shoe that was never found, the notes that mocked a city, the 30 Easter weekends Janet Tinsley survived, none of it was ever going to be answered by luck. It was answered by preserved evidence, by detectives who kept transferring a file instead of closing it, and by a culture of ordinary people whose curiosity about their great-grandparents quietly built the largest investigative tool of the century. April Marie Tinsley, 8 years old, remembered. If you want to know what this same method did for a young couple who vanished on a ferry trip in 1987, that case file is open on your screen now. The cases are cold, the answers are not.